Hello, everyone. Welcome to the November 2015 Professor Messer Network Plus Study Group. This is a study group that I put together every month, and we go through Network Plus topics. I'll ask you questions, and you'll answer. There's a whole online system we'll use. You can pop open your mobile device or pop open a new browser so that when I ask you the question, you can actually tell me the answer. Then we'll see how everyone does with that. It's a lot of fun. It'll be great. We'll do that for an hour. And then the second hour, I'll open up the phone lines and take questions from the chat room. Hello, chat room. If you are watching this live on YouTube, then you can also think about going to my website at professormesser.com/live, where there's a chat room on the page, and you can participate there. I watch the chat during this study group, so I can get feedback from you about the questions and the answers and ask any questions you may be asking in there as well. There is quite a bit that we've got going on. I wouldn't be able to do this study group, of course, without your help. You're able to not only watch the videos that I have on my site, because all of my Network Plus videos are available for you to watch absolutely free. There's no charge at all to go online and watch them as much as you'd like. But if you'd like an offline version, if perhaps you want MP3 files, or you would like to take this on a plane where you don't have a lot of bandwidth, or in your car, well, one way to do this is to purchase a course. You can find out about this at professormesser.com/getnetplus. And you get with that not only the 1080p video, you get also those are all closed captioned. So that's another nice thing about that. There's MP3 files along with that. And my course notes come with that. We'll talk more about the course notes in a bit. You can also follow this link to purchase the MP3 files by themselves. Some people just need audio, so I make that available for you as well. Well, I mentioned you'll be able to follow along and answer the questions as I ask them. So if you're new to this, you'll want to learn all about Socrative. Socrative is an online service I use for this, where I will ask you the question and you can punch in on your mobile device in your browser. And it's very easy. Just go to Socrative.com and you want to click on the student login and go to the room called Professor Messer. Just make sure you spell it right. Now, if you're watching this in the replay, this isn't going to work. This is only for the people that are attending live. For the replay, you don't see this flipping, but you'll be able to see everything on the screen. So at least that is a little bit of it, of something that you can follow along with. So make a note next to you, take an idea of what you think the answer is, and then you can at least see if you agree with everyone else who is here live today. Of course, if you'd like to watch live at any time, you can go to professormesser.com/calendar, and you can see when the next live event might be. Now, make sure when you go to Socrative and click the student login that you're not clicking the teacher login. That was my login. You're the student, so you click student login and make sure you type in Professor Messer as it's spelled here, PROFESSORMESSER, or you will not be able to see anything happening. And that's a pretty important part of this. You'll be in the wrong room. So make sure you go through this and have a look. There is a number of people that are already seeing the questions pop up. So we can absolutely do this. Make sure you go to that in the chat room. They're like, you can do this. You can just go in here and be able to look at the Network Plus questions. Absolutely. In fact, the question you'll see will look something like this once you log in. How long have you been studying for your Network Plus certification? It's a good question. You can, of course, answer this the less than 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months, 9 months to a year, over a year. Some of you may already have your Network Plus certification. And if that is the case, make sure that you are listening, because sometime during this hour, I will give you a special code word that you can send to me, and I will send you back a digital certification that says you indeed watched this, and you'll get an hour of a CEU that you could use for renewal. So if you are collecting CEUs for renewal, this is one way you can do that. Of course, many of you are just taking the next higher level exam. You might take Security Plus, and that, of course, renews your Network Plus automatically without having to go through all the collection of CEUs. But for those of you like me that you just get CEUs as part of what you do during your normal work life, it's very easy to collect those, and then you don't have to take any tests to renew anything. So there's a couple ways to do that. We can talk more about renewals in the second hour of our study group today. So you can see by looking at these questions, a number of you have already answered. It looks like 38% have been studying less than 3 months and 23% from 3 to 6 months. And that's usually what we get here on the study group, is about half of us are just getting started. And then, of course, the folks over a year, as I mentioned, are folks like me. It take a long time to get a certification going. And, of course, the 13% of you already have your Network Plus. So you're here to see, Do I really remember as much as I think I remember? The answer is no, because I have to go through this and build these questions as well. And sometimes it triggers things in my mind. This Network Plus exam has been around for a while. We are currently on the existing exam called the N10006. There was an N10005 that was retired on August the 31st for English speaking anyway. For the rest of the year, at least until December 31st, for the non-English speaking exams, you can still take the N10005. So for most of us, though, I think that are probably watching this and listening to me speak in English, you're probably ready to take the N10006, which is your only choice at this point. That is the latest exam, and it's probably going to be updated in about 3 years. It was released in February. So you've got plenty of time now to study this N10006 and learn everything you need to know about the networking. It was really just a minor update from the 5 to the 6. So if you were studying for the 5, don't worry. The 006 is easy enough to jump into. So it doesn't matter which one you took, by the way. You get exactly the same certification, so you don't lose anything either by waiting. So that part's good as well. So make sure you have a look at the N10006 exam objectives if you are studying for the exam. There's a lot of 005 stuff still out there because the 005 is still active for non-English speaking countries. So make sure that if you are going to be taking the exam, that you get all of the materials that say N10006. The 005 materials simply won't be good enough. You want to make sure you have everything you can to be able to make that particular exam go as well as possible. Which of these would be the best choice to limit access to a network? There's a few ways to limit access to a network, but one of these is really going to be the best way to limit access to the network. And that's really one of the key words you should watch for on the Network Plus exam is where is the best choice out of these? Because there could be questions where some of the answers might technically be correct. This might be one of them. Let's see what the answers are. Which of these would be the best choice to limit access to a network? Would it be 802.11? Would it be 802.1x? Would it be RFC 1918? Would it be 802.1d? Or would it be 802.3? There's a lot of numbers there. Just kind of threw a lot of numbers. So you have to know what those are. If you think you know the answer, don't answer in the chat room. You should go to Socrative.com to the student login into the room name Professor Messer, and you can answer the question. You tell me what it happens to be. This is where whenever I start putting these questions together, I'm trying to give you a couple of steps so that you can think through what the answer might be. Obviously, here I'm asking you for limiting access to a network. That's relatively straightforward. You should, of course, know what that means. But secondly, it's the list of the answers that really starts you thinking, because you have to know what each one of these things happens to be so that you can determine which one is the best choice. See what I did there? So really, this is more than a two-step question. This is more like a five-step question, because you have to understand what every single one of these oddly numbered things happens to be. And every single one of them, by the way, is absolutely legitimate. I didn't make up any of these answers. They are all network technologies, and only one of them is really going to be the best choice to limit access to a network. Let's see how we do with this one. I'm going to take a peek while you're not looking at these. See if we can see what this is. Yeah, I think we did pretty well with this one. My goal is for at least half of you to find the right answer and get that one right. I'm not trying to make them tricky, but I'm trying to make them hard enough that if it's something you really don't know, that it's going to be obvious. Oh, I got that one wrong. But getting things wrong helps you now know what the correct answer is. So that's the real challenge is in going through these. Let's see how we did. So no, all of you were Googling madly. You have to Google 5 times, though, to figure this one out, wouldn't you? How'd we do? Well, let's see. 53% of us said 802.1x. In second place, RFC 1918 is 19%. And in third place, with double digits, 802.11. In single digits, 802.1d and 802.3 didn't even make the cut there. They're down at the bottom. So which one of these would it be? What would limit access to a network? Now, we're talking about just generic network access to the network itself. So we're really talking about the security we have of getting onto the network or providing access into devices that are on the network. This is very, very commonly used in almost any small, medium, or even large organization. This is a very common way to restrict because you don't have control in these office spaces. Someone can walk in from the outside. It's a guest. It's somebody there for a meeting. They're not part of your organization. They can walk into a conference room and plug into an Ethernet jack. And at that point, if you did not have some type of security, they would have complete access to the network. They may not have authentication, but that's a common thing to get. That's an obvious next step. What if we could block them from even getting access to the network? And that's really where switchport security comes in. This allows us to do a number of different things. Now, of course, in your conference rooms, you may just be turning on and off ports administratively. But of course, if somebody needs access to those Ethernet connections while in the conference room, you'll spend your day turning ports on and off. So that might not be the right way to do it. Another way, especially in wireless networks, is to do MAC address filtering. Being able to find that, and if anybody's trying to duplicate a MAC address, to be able to stop them. The part that provides you with the real access to the network, though, that really allows you to control who's going to be on the network, is 802.1x. This is what we call NAC. And I guess the formal abbreviation is port-based NAC, port-based network access control. But in the way that we talk about it, if somebody talks to you about NAC, they're really talking about 802.1x. This means you don't even get access to the network unless you authenticate with some type of mechanism. And many organizations have a very standard way that they will authenticate. A lot of environments have an Active Directory infrastructure because they're running Windows devices. So they already have a big database of usernames and passwords. So it's very easy for somebody to come in, they'll hit the wireless network or they'll plug into the interface in the conference room. And before they can access anything, it pops up a message on the screen that says, put in your credentials. And you have to have credentials to be even allowed access to the rest of the network. It's really a brilliant way to do this. Very common to see on wireless networks and very common to see on public wired connections where you might be in your environment. This takes advantage of authentication mechanisms, authentication protocols. So you have some type of database on the back end, and you're communicating to that database through something like EAP, like Radius, like LDAP in the case of Windows, or even through something like TACACS, or even using Microsoft's own technologies to be able to authenticate to the back-end databases. That is one thing that is incredibly important when you get into these larger environments. This isn't something you generally find in a home office. It's always when there's going to be multiple people around. So that's a great way to go about doing those pieces and being able to work with those. So let's see how we did. 802.1x would have been the correct answer. So the 55% of you that answered B, 802.1x, got that one absolutely right. RFC 1918 is the specification that tells you what private IP addresses are available on your network. So if you notice, there's a list of RFC 1918 addresses in my Network Plus videos where I talk about the 10. network, the 172.16 through 172.31, and the 192.168.0.0 network. So those particular RFC 1918 addresses specify what are private addresses. They have nothing to do with limiting access to a network. The next most popular was 802.11. 802.11 is wireless networks. That's the wireless network standard. And that really doesn't talk about authentication. It really talks about how you get access to a wireless network, how you can connect and use a wireless network. So there's no authentication technically built into that single standard. There is also, in the 802.1d, this is the next most popular answer, that is your spanning tree, which will, of course, stop loops on a switch network. That has nothing to do with authentication to the network itself. And, of course, 802.3 is the Ethernet standard. And again, it's just another networking standard. Similar to 802.11 is wireless, 802.3 is Ethernet. So it's a very good way as you're looking through these pieces to understand what the options might be. Let's try a different question then. I think we did pretty well on that one. The 56% of you that got B got that one absolutely right. Well done on that piece. But I have more questions for you. Let's keep this party going. I've got more here to go through. Hopefully that helped in the chat room. They're saying, hey, what about those other answers? Hopefully that's given you some insight into what those other answers might be and what they were referring to. So let's do another question about networks, shall we? Since that is the topic at hand. This is one that's really asking for your understanding of a particular kind of technology. Since we're sort of on the router mode here, we can talk about this one. What would you configure to prevent routing advertisements from being sent to the interface where they were originally learned? This is a very common configuration setting when you're working with routers, so it's an important one to understand what this does. So one of these answers is going to be a configuration setting that would prevent routing advertisements being sent to the interface where they were originally learned. Kind of makes sense that you wouldn't want that to be there. So let's see what these might be for these. Your possible answers could be split horizon, could be load balancing, could be convergence, it might be route poisoning, or it might be link aggregation. One of these might be this. So if you think you know the answer, don't answer in the chat room. Don't Google it. You should take a guess. Pretend you're on the exam and you're having to take this question right off the top and figure out what it might be. Go to Socrative.com, click the student login, and go to the Professor Messer room name. And again, sorry if you're watching this on the replay, you won't be able to do that, but make a note of one of those answers and see if it's one of those that you might think it would be. This is one that comes up quite a bit. One of the challenges with this question, though, is a lot of the answers are routing configuration options. So it makes it a little more difficult to figure out because these things that I gave you on the screen, a number of them are very specific to routing configurations, but you want to find a very specific routing configuration that's talking about these pieces. See if you can figure out what it happens to be. Routing advertisements is one you have to deal with when you're setting up routers, so you do have to know how to configure them, and especially if you're misconfigured them, you have to know why you're not seeing something that you would expect to see in those pieces. That should be useful to be able to know what that happens to be. So let's see if we happen to know what it is. I think a lot of you will. I'm going to take a peek since a lot of you are answering. We're doing pretty well with this one. We'll have to see what these options might be. Let's see how we did. I think a few of you are kind of looking at this one and wondering, what in the world are we talking about? Because that's an answer that most of us didn't think was going to be there. So we had kind of a mixed bag on this one. 38% of you said split horizon. 23% of you said convergence. 17% said route poisoning. 14% said link aggregation. Only 6% said load balancing. I think we can throw out load balancing. Nobody really bought that one as being the way to prevent routing advertisements from being sent to the interface where they were first learned. Well, let's learn about these routing configuration issues. You're going to run into these quite a bit when you start working with routers, so it's good if you knew this to begin with. One of the things you'll run across, especially a number of routing problems, is one called split horizon. Now, obviously, our routers, when they are configured for dynamic routing, have to keep everybody up to date with what they happen to know. And so they send advertisements from one router to the other so that everybody understands where all the routes are in their organization. That's the beauty of dynamic routing, is you don't have to go to every router and manually configure a static route. Instead, you simply tell the router, go figure it out yourself. Go talk amongst yourselves and figure out where all the routes are. And they do exactly that. Each router talks to the ones that are closest to it and say, hey, did you know about these routes I know about? Here's a bunch of routes that I happen to know of. Just thought you'd like to know. And your local router will fill in its routing table and go, oh, to get to that route, I'll just go to you next time. Thanks for letting me know about that. These routing advertisements are really useful. This is interesting. The split horizon, though, is when you can configure so that your router will not send the same routing advertisements back out the interface where they were originally learned. This becomes very handy because whenever you're starting to get a lot of routing updates, why would you tell the router that just told you where the route was, where the route happens to be? It already knows where the route is. Hey, I thought I'd tell you where this route is. Oh, yeah? Well, here's the route right back to you. Why'd you tell me that? Of course, it doesn't hurt anything to just simply repeat back. But when you start getting to the point where you got a lot of routing advertisements going back and forth, why would you keep sending this redundant information back out to that interface? So the split horizon turns on this functionality that is going to prevent the routing loop. And in fact, that really helps too for some of these, because you might have multiple routes coming from multiple places and you're sending out different routes to different routers. You don't want to start creating one that would now loop this information back and forth between those. So in our particular case, when we look at all of these different options, you can see a lot of you snuck in now and put split horizon. You're not fooling me. We saw what you answered prior to doing this. So 46% of you have now said split horizon. You'd be absolutely right with this. There's load balancing, convergence, route poisoning, link aggregations, not one of those. But in this particular case, it's not something we have to worry too much about. The load balancing, nobody thought it was load balancing with that one. So that's not one I would ever need to worry about for that piece. One that is convergence is when the network now suddenly detects there's a change. A route has appeared or a route has disappeared, and now everybody has to be in it now and have that information announced to all of the other routers. So now that they understand something just changed, we may have to change where we're sending information. So we need to converge and get all this information back to a steady state so that everything is the way it was. That is convergence. That's not sending router advertisements to the interface where they were originally learned. Route poisoning. Excuse me, I'm talking a little too much today. Route poisoning is when we are specifically setting a route to be unreachable. And we might do this because the route may have become invalid, or we might have lost the connection. Maybe somebody unplugged the connection from the router. The router can now send a very specific message, not just saying the route isn't here anymore or missing the route in the update, but specifically sending out an announcement that's telling them this route is now invalid. We're poisoning that route, so nobody will use that route to go down that road. And link aggregation is when we get multiple connections and we aggregate them together to get more bandwidth out of that connection. That's one where when you start working through these pieces, it will be very useful. No, not rat poison. Rat poison would be a completely different thing, although it works a very similar way, doesn't it? It prevents anybody or any rats from coming down that route because that route doesn't exist anymore. It's a very similar type of scenario in those pieces to work through that. So I think you folks did pretty good with that one. If you answered A, split horizon, you got that one absolutely correct. There are a lot of these little terms and things you need to know and nuanced specifics on the exam. And it'd be useful if I could just take all of the information from my videos. And as you're going through the videos, you could take notes of everything. Now, you can, of course, do that yourself, or I've already done that for you. I've created my own set of course notes that takes all the important things from my videos, collapses everything down into a set of singles. And in fact, it's a very comprehensive set, 15 pages of Network Plus content. You can see a summary of it there on the screen. There's quite a bit of content. It covers everything in the exam. The subnetting piece, the protocols. I've got details in there on topologies and proxies. The course notes themselves are big. I think I've got one on the screen I can show you. Here, I'm kind of flipping through them on my screen as we go. So all these great graphics and text and details that are in my videos are now in these course notes. So it doesn't replace your book. It doesn't replace any of the detailed video watching you might do. But if you need something to kind of give you an update before you get to the exam, this might be something to consider. And of course, every dollar from this is going back to keeping the website going as well. So for those of you that are nice enough to send me emails and say, this is really helpful, I'd love to donate. Well, I don't accept donations, but I like to give you something in return. So you might want to consider getting some course notes. And it's a great way to contribute back to what we're doing at the website. Plus, you get some great course notes as well to be able to use and study for your exam. These are PDF files. You get them immediately. You can put them on all of your devices. So that way it doesn't matter whether you're on your mobile device, you're on your phone, you're on your tablet, you're on your desktop computer. You can access them from anywhere. If you'd like to know more about these, have a look at my website. You can go to professormesser.com/NPCN, Network Plus Course Notes, and be able to see more about that and see if the course notes might be for you. Maybe that's something you can use as well. I do not allow you to pay in Bitcoin at this point. The chat room's asking about Bitcoin. I don't do that in Bitcoin. Instead, we're going to use just the normal check. You've got credit card, but no Bitcoin, at least not yet. Maybe I should consider doing that since now the chat room's asking me about it. This is one where a question where now I want to, especially IP addresses and MAC addresses come into play. And here's the question. You've just pinged your default gateway at 10.1.1.1. Which of these, and I'll give you the options of what these might be, which of these would be the best way to determine the MAC address of the gateway? So now we're doing some troubleshooting. We need to be able to work with this and be able to go through these pieces. I've got some options for you, fortunately. So you've got this. Yes, you can pay with PayPal. So we've got those. Everything, I guess, but Bitcoin for those. Here are your options. Is it netstat-a 10.1.1.1? Is it ARP-A? Is it NSLOOKUP 10.1.1.1? Is it MBT-stat-A 10.1.1.1? Is it traceroute 10.1.1.1? Or you can't determine the MAC address of the default gateway. So I've given you an out. So you really have to know this answer, because it could actually be that none of these is the answer and you can't do it at all. So you've pinged your default gateway. Now you want to know the MAC address of the gateway. Is it one of these? Is it not one of these? You need to be able to answer. No answering in the chat room, of course, and being able to do that. Of course, for those of you in the chat room that maybe didn't catch it at the beginning, sometime during this hour, I will give you a code word for your CEUs, and I'll tell you how to send those to me during that point. So you have to keep listening to be able to do that. That's the whole point of getting this special CEU code, isn't it? So if you think you know the answer to this question, though, you can go to Socrative.com to the student login and see if you can answer. I'm going to have a look at how we're doing with this one. I think my 50% goal is working out pretty well this time. I think we're doing a good job. My goal is to make it difficult enough that you don't exactly know the answer, but that helps you learn more. You're never going to learn something unless you get it wrong. I never learn anything unless I break it. So during the process of fixing it is where I really understand how it works. I spent the last week doing a ton of SQL development stuff, MySQL specifically, and web servers, and trying to get into doing a very special project I'm working on for Messer Studios. And that's where you really get into, hey, this didn't work. Why didn't it work? Was it a PHP thing? Is it a MySQL thing? Did I configure it wrong in the database? And you learn about these things as you're doing it. Same way with this particular example, because I'm asking you specifically about some command lines that you need to know. And there's a number of command lines you need to know for the Network Plus exam. So one of these command lines is going to be useful. And by the way, this is a very common thing to do, because whenever you're pinging a device, it would be nice to know if you were able to really see that device on the network, especially if it didn't respond to a ping. You may want to know, well, does it even exist? And this is the test that really helps you understand if it exists. 52% of us said ARP-A. We've got a tie for second. Netstat-A and NSLOOKUP are tied for second. We've got NPT-stat and traceroute, and you can't determine, kind of taking up a third, number 3 on the list, because there's a single digits on all 3 of those. So how would you determine the MAC address of the gateway? Well, you would do that through the address resolution protocol. This is what ARP does. ARP's job, whenever you are first trying to access a device by IP address, your machine can't talk via IP. It's on an Ethernet network. It has to communicate using a MAC address at its most basic level. So before it can actually send information to that IP address, it needs to find out what the MAC address of that device is. And that's what ARP does. Your device sends out a broadcast to everybody and says, hi, I've got to ping you. If you're out there and you happen to be 10.1.1.1, please respond back with your MAC address, because I now need to send you some information. And when it replies back with that MAC address, your machine puts that information into a cache, because you might want to communicate with this device again very shortly. So it doesn't have to keep over and over ARPing for the same information. Instead, we can ARP one time, and now we know until your ARP table times out. To be able to see that ARP table, you perform an ARP-A and being able to see that piece. This is one where, especially when you get into doing things with at the command line, this becomes extremely useful. ARP-A will give you a list of what that local ARP table happens to be. There is a number of different options available when working on the ARPs. And this is one you will use constantly, especially if you ping a device and you don't get a response back. It just times out. And you're wondering to yourself, is the device even there? Did it even respond to my original ARP? And so one way to check is to see, do I have a list for that in my ARP table? Maybe it has a firewall turned on and I'm able to get its MAC address, but it's not going to respond to a ping. That's a very common situation, especially when you're working with infrastructure equipment, because you don't want it to do that. You don't want it to respond to those and being able to work with those. So that's at least you'd be able to see, is it talking to the right device? Or if it's going to a default gateway, is it going to the right default gateway? One way to be sure is to check the MAC address. And that's where ARP really becomes handy. So if we look at the options we had, the 52% of you that said ARP-A got that one absolutely right. Netstat-A or Netstat, and this is not exactly the type of syntax you would use with the netstat command. Netstat shows you all of the things that your device that you're on is either communicating to or is being communicated into, and it's doing this. It may even show you open ports on your device. There's so much Netstat can do. It's an incredibly useful utility. But Netstat itself shows you from an IP perspective. It doesn't necessarily show you MAC address information, certainly not the best way to determine a MAC address of any device. And normally it's your MAC address that you're getting information from. Netstat's very My Machine centric. NSLOOKUP is one we would use to convert the name of a device to an IP address or the IP address back to the fully qualified domain name. It doesn't deal at all with MAC addresses. That is an IP type functionality, so that would not be the correct answer. NBTStat is a NetBIOS statistic or NetBIOS information that you can gather on a Windows network. That's not necessarily going to provide you with much MAC address information either. That's really dealing with the NetBIOS name and the IP address associated with a Windows device. There's also Traceroute, which will show you all of the routes between your device and another one that's out there on the network, and it shows you based on IP address. It does not show you information based on MAC address, so Traceroute would not be the correct answer either. And the option of not determining the MAC address of a default gateway, you absolutely can determine the MAC address because we proved it by using ARP-A. That would be the correct answer for those. So for those of you that answered B, good job. Got that one absolutely right. We've got time for a few more questions, so let's get a couple more in while we're working on these. The next question is about wireless MAC filtering. So we need to understand the options for wireless MAC filtering, and the question specifically is which of these would best describe wireless MAC filtering? Would it be unknown devices cannot connect to the wireless network? Would it be that the wireless network name does not appear in a list of available networks? Would it be that users must provide authentication credentials to connect to the wireless network? Would it be that all network is encrypted on that wireless network? Or would it be that only certain applications can be used on the wireless network? One of these best describes wireless MAC filtering. We certainly have to know those for our Network Plus exam. So let's see how we do with these and getting those for those. This is one where, especially when I start working through the details of these problems and these exams, it becomes a little bit of a challenge to understand all of these different terms that are expected of me. And probably the Network Plus exam, more than any other, expects a lot of you. It really does go through expecting a ton from you. So let's see how we do with our wireless MAC filtering question. I'm going to see for those and being able to work with those. Let's see what we have on. I'm going to sneak a peek on how we're doing so far. You're doing pretty good. A lot of you are Googling wireless MAC filtering. I can tell because I can see the numbers that are going up and what they happen to be. I think we're doing pretty good with this one. Let's see how we did on the wireless MAC filtering. How do we do? Well, here we go. Well, 91% of us said unknown devices cannot connect to the wireless network. The one where I at least get a couple of people biting would be the wireless network name does not appear in a list of available networks. 6% of you said, though, that users must provide authentication credentials to connect to the wireless network. And 2% said only certain applications can be used on the wireless network. Well, for those of you that kind of looked at this number, 89% is a pretty solid number. MAC filtering isn't referring to an operating system. It's referring to a media access control address. That's the hardware address of your device. And when you're doing MAC address filtering, since your MAC address is the hardware address, we're filtering out an entire piece of hardware. We're filtering out that particular network device from communicating to the network. This is something you find very commonly on wireless networks, but you could do this with wired as well. Something that you do run into with those pieces. This is one where MAC addresses and MAC filtering is sort of a way to prevent access. The problem is that MAC addresses can be very easily spoofed. So all you have to do is collect information about who's on the network now, wait for them to leave the network, and now I can go set this up and start working through it again. This is one where I think whenever I start working through these problems and trying to figure out what makes sense, MAC filtering is something that sort of makes sense, but then when you get into it, you realize it doesn't provide any security at all. Very limited functionality there. It's almost like telling people don't come in the door, except the door is wide open, that kind of scenario. So for those of you that, we'll have a look at the answers again, just so you think you can figure this piece out. There it is. Those of you that answered A would have got that one absolutely correct. It was unknown devices cannot connect to the wireless network. The wireless network name not appearing in a list of available networks, that is SSID filtering. So that's a different kind of filtering, or you can think of SSID broadcast suppression or disabling SSID broadcast. That's what that happens to be. Users providing authentication credentials to connect to the wireless network. We talked about this earlier. It's 802.1x. That's that technology. All network traffic is encrypted. That may be built into your wireless network with WEP or WEP2 or WEP or WPA2, ideally WPA2. Hopefully you're not using WEP on your network. And only certain applications can be used on the wireless network. Well, that would be a completely different set of technologies, perhaps application layer firewall, not really application layer firewall, application aware firewalls. Let's get that one right. You'd think that one would be top of mind for me. But no, that is one that doesn't even fall into the realm of MAC filtering, although it is a type of filtering with those pieces. So that covers the answers. If you answered A on that one, you got it absolutely right. Well done with those pieces. This is these nomenclature problems are going to be very common on the Network Plus exam. I've got another one for you where you have to figure it out based on the answer. And I don't give you just a single definition. I want you to really understand what the possible answers might be on these pieces. So here is a question that says, which of these would be the best example of AAA? AAA. That's what we usually refer to as AAA in the industry. And is the best example of AAA a firewall is configured to explicitly deny all traffic? Is it a server has redundant Ethernet connections to the network? Is it that different departments are segmented to different VLANs? Is it that a user must authenticate with their Windows domain credentials to print? Or would it be the best example, a multiple network connections being used in tandem to increase throughput? One of these would be the best description of AAA. So this is not, this has nothing to do with automobiles. It has nothing to do with wrestling. This is something completely different. You can see I have no wrestling or automobile references in there. If you think you know the answer, don't answer in the chat room. Simply go to Socrative.com to the student login to the room name Professor Messer. I think some of you might know this one. Let me see how we did. I'm going to take a peek on my side and see if some of you happen to know what this answer might be with those pieces. This is one that does create a bit of challenges. And this is one where, especially when dealing with all of those different terms, and if you go to the Network Plus exam objectives, there's a big list of terms in the back. This is certainly one of those that you should know. Let's see how we did with this one. How do we do? Well, 66% said a user must authenticate with their Windows domain credentials to print, but 17% said a firewall is configured to explicitly deny all traffic. We got almost double digits. 9% said different departments are segmented to different VLANs. There you go. Now we got double digits there. And then single digits, we got multiple network connections used in tandem and a server using redundant Ethernet connections. Not too many people chose that particular one. So let's talk about AAA and what AAA is used for in these environments that we're working through. Whenever I start looking at these networks and how they are used, AAA becomes incredibly important. In fact, it's a very common staple of practically any size network these days. AAA is the authentication, the authorization, and the accounting that's used. It's kind of a fancy way to say that we're going to require that you give me some authentication. So you got to give me some username and password to get in there. I'm then going to check that and authorize your access to a particular resource. I'm not going to give you complete access to everything, but I'll give you access to a certain part of the network, for example. And the accounting piece doesn't deal with numbers. It deals with letters more appropriately, I guess letters and numbers, because we're keeping track of who's authenticating and what they're gaining access to. So we're always keeping a log. That's what that accounting piece is really referring to when we're talking about AAA. When somebody says, I have a AAA server, they mean that they've configured a Radius server. They might have a Cisco TACAX server. They might have an LDAP server. And they're saying we're providing AAA functionality through these protocols to our AAA server, which is going to authenticate, authorize, and account for all of the communication that's going back and forth over the network. Almost always using some type of central database. Maybe it's connected to your Microsoft Active Directory domain. That's a good way to do it as well. These permissions that you get might even be connected to that database. So I'm logging with the username and password, and the AAA server knows all the different groups that you belong to, and it provides you with the proper access depending on what group you are in. If you're in IT, then you get credentials associated with IT. If you're in shipping and receiving, you get the access that you would be given for someone in the shipping and receiving department just by logging in with your name and your password. It knows all of that about you. It could be really handy to have that functionality as well. Now, for those of you that are wondering then, if we look at our answers, the one that deals with authentication, it deals with authorization, it deals with accounting is going to be the only option really here is option D. A user must authenticate with their Windows domain credentials to print. We're going to require that you provide some type of authentication so that we can give you the proper authorization and then log, in fact, through our accounting system that you indeed authenticated to that printer and you printed that information out. Now, if you're watching these videos for continuing education units, this would be the time when you need to write down the special code of the month, which is AAA. Send me a message by going to either the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website. At the very top and the very bottom is a link that says Contact Us, which is really Contact Me. And put in that message your name, put in the date for this particular study group. So this would be the November 2015 Network Plus study group, and give me that special code word of AAA. And I'm reading those, so if you want to put a note in there saying hi, that would be nice too. I'd like to get those. And I will send you back a digitally signed digital certificate that will have your name and information on there for that 1 hour of continuing education unit credit. Well, I also want to mention for those of you that are watching, I wouldn't be able to do this without the help of GTS Learning. They're the folks that have those great integrated learning systems. They have the book that I use to create all of my videos are also made by GTS Learning. They give me their book and I just create all of my videos based on that content. They're fantastic books. They're immediately straight to the point, and they're able to give you a lot of information about just what you need to know. It doesn't go into a lot of detail of things you don't need to know, which I understand can be useful, but I'm trying to pass a certification. It would be nice if I could just maybe focus on the things that are important to me to be able to get through this. And that's indeed what they do with their book. They also online have a number of sample exams that you can take. Those can be useful as well. And one of the things that I've showed you before on the study group is that they have a lot of live labs available with virtual machines where you can simply connect to their live labs like I'm doing here. I'm selecting individual servers. I'm going to start booting up some of these servers that I have here. Here's a domain controller, a Linux server. Here's a Windows 7 device. Here's an XP device. And they have labs that are already set up for me. I know it's hard to see with my head in the way there. These labs are already set up. If I could show you the right one, there we go. Here. So here's the lab on the side. I could pop this out, make it different, stick it on the other screen that I have over here, and I can step through all of the exercises, and I can learn step by step with screenshots exactly what I should be typing in to learn these command lines, to learn the VPN functionality. This happens to be understanding common network vulnerabilities, which of course is a section of the Network Plus exam dealing on the security side. So this is one where I start stepping through these pieces. That becomes pretty handy. And having all these virtual machines here means that I don't have to go set up a separate systems. I don't have to have operating systems. I don't have to load up or install a Windows operating system and then configure it. And then even once I did all of that, I wouldn't know what to do next. I wouldn't have a lab available. Well, they've got all this online. I can be anywhere and simply click a button. I don't need extra software. It's all running in my browser with HTML5, and I'm on my Windows machine. And I can step through. I can make this full screen. I can change the way the views of it. I can step through and do exactly what's asking me to do in the exam or in my labs. And this is a full-blown Windows. This is not an emulated or screenshotted version of Windows. This is a full-blown piece, which makes it nice as well, because you can go into the operating system and really go into it and break it. Try it out. Let's flip over to a Windows machine. Here it is. So now I'm on the Windows 7 device, so I can try this out. And in fact, this particular lab is one where we're going through and understanding these network vulnerabilities. This is a great way to step through and really understand hands-on so that you can pass some of those performance-based problems you'll run into on the Network Plus. And you get an hour for free. So if you think maybe this is for me, maybe this is not for me, you can try it yourself. And when you get this, these practice labs, this is also something that by going to professormesser.com/netlabs, you can try this, and you also have access to their online book. You also have access to their practice questions. So it's not just the labs. You get everything. It's integrated learning. That's the way integrated learning should be. And instead of going to the GTS Learning site where you're paying $159, you get a year's worth of access to the labs for $99. So a special price that you can only get through Professor Messer by following my link at professormesser.com/netlabs. I want to thank GTS Learning for everything they do to support what we do here at Professor Messer. And I love their live labs. I use them all the time. There's something that I go into and can start messing around with the operating systems and do some screenshots so that I can show you things on these study groups. So it becomes handy as well. Try your hour for free, professormesser.com/netlabs. And we've got time to squeeze in one more question, I think. So let's absolutely do this. This one is dealing with, of course, Slack. That's what you want when you're working through a problem, is these Slack issues. What is Slack used to determine the local subnet address? And again, no answering in here because this is not, don't understand exactly what Slack might be. You had to figure it out. Imagine sitting in front of this on the exam and going through those pieces of it. Comes in very handy. So what could it be? What does Slack use? Does it use DAD? Does it use DHCP v6 solicit? Does it use NDP? Does it use DHCP v4? Does it use ARP? It uses one of these to determine the local subnet address. It's kind of nice that anything can figure out what the local subnet address is. So we should figure this out for Slack. Now, if you think you know the answer, don't answer in the chat room. You should go to Socrative, into the student login, to the Professor Messer room, and see if you can answer. I'm watching all of you Google this right now. You think I can't see you doing this, but I can. Stop that. Just take a stab at it. See what you think it might be to determine the local subnet address. I bet if you work it out, if I look at this, if I work through these pieces, I could at least get rid of a couple of possible answers. So if I get rid of those couple of possible answers, it could be these other three. You can probably break it down to figure those pieces out for those. I think that comes in handy as well. This is one where trying to understand all of these different terms from the Network Plus becomes incredibly important. So let's see how we did with this one. What does Slack do to determine the local subnet address? Well, we're all over the place. We have a tie for first, in fact, pretty close to a tie. This is DHCP solicit, got 34%. DHCP version 4 got 36%. About 20% said NDP. 8% said DAD, and 6% said ARP. Maybe a number of you said, maybe not ARP. We just talked about ARP. Would he give us ARP again? He could. It might be. So what would it be? Well, in this particular case, we're dealing specifically with an IPv6 protocol called Neighbor Discovery Protocol, NDP. NDP is one that now we kind of get rid of that concept of ARP. We get rid of a lot of the things that normally are used for broadcasts. In fact, we get rid of all the need for broadcasts. That's one of the problems we had with the IPv4 world, is that you had broadcasts in the way. Well, instead, let's use multicasts, which are a much more intelligent way of communicating between like devices. One of the things that NDP does is that it replaces ARP. So that comes in handy. We can get rid of the whole ARP thing and deal specifically with NDP. It's sort of a IPv6 way of ARPing. You want to look at it that way. It also is very important and used when you're trying to get an IP address configured for your local device. And there's many different ways to have your IP addresses assigned to your local devices with IP version 6. But Slack is the stateless address auto configuration. And it's a way that you can give everybody an absolutely legitimate IP address without a DHCP server. How great is that? That's one that's really useful for being able to do that, because if your DHCP server goes down, then in IPv4, nobody can communicate outside of your local subnet. With Slack now, your machine and IPv6 figures everything out on its own. So it goes out and figures out where the routers are and does a router solicitation and looks at router advertisements to figure out where the routers are. And then it does a duplicate address check to make sure that it's not going to duplicate what happens to be out there on the network. So if you are one of those folks that answered in this particular case, what does Slack use to determine the local address, the local subnet address? It's going to be the network address discovery, or the neighbor discovery protocol. NDP is a critical part of IPv6. The duplicate address detection is not used to determine the local subnet address, but obviously it is used by Slack. DHCP v6 solicit is not used in this particular case. That is a completely different stateful address configuration. In this case, we're dealing with Slack, which is stateless. For a DHCP, we've got a DHCP server we're dealing with that's not stateless. And DHCP v4, this is not a version 4 functionality. And obviously, Slack is an IPv6 function. ARP is not in IPv6, so it would not be E. The answer in this particular case is C, the Neighbor Discovery Protocol, or NDP. Comes in handy whenever you start working with those. Wow. So we've gone through an entire hour of questions and answers again. I can't believe we were able to get through so much in such a short period of time. But of course, this is not the last time we're doing one of these. If you want to follow what we do, we've got another one planned for December the 9th. And about a month from now, we'll be able to go through another one of these Network Plus study groups. If you're watching this in a replay and this is after any of those dates, you can always go to professormesser.com/calendar and know exactly when the next set of study groups are. I do one of these for A+, I do one for Network Plus, I do one for Security Plus. Maybe you'd like to attend all three, or if you'd just like to find out when the next one is, go to the calendar. It'll tell you all of those pieces and what you might want to do with those, and know exactly when I'll be live, and you'll be able to register. I can send you an email. You'll get updates and all of those great things. Well, don't forget, I'm on the Twitter, so you might want to follow me on professormesser.com/Twitter. And if you want to see when the latest videos come out, you can, of course, subscribe on YouTube at professormesser.com/YouTube. And you kind of see it there when my head is not in the way. I can't get out of the way fast enough to be able to see that piece of it, unfortunately. There's also my Network Plus course notes. Don't forget about those. You can find those at professormesser.com/NPCN for the Network Plus course notes. Again, I want to thank GTS Learning and their Net Labs, their live labs, and get your free hour, professormesser.com/netlabs. Of course, go to the calendar to find out when we do these every month. And of course, I couldn't do these without you. If nobody showed up to answer any questions, it would be the most boring study group ever. So thank you so much for attending live. Thank you for watching the replays as well. I get great feedback from you. Thanks for sending me those emails, and keep them coming. You can always contact me at the top or bottom of the website. Just click Contact Us. You'll be able to do that as well. If you're watching live, stick around for the second hour. We're going to go through and take some phone calls, or at least answer some questions from the chat room. Otherwise, we'll see you next month on the study group. Thanks, everyone. Whee! A lot going on this month. That first question was so involved, took so much time. I wanted to get through at least one more. I know we kind of went over there, but I wanted to get through that little piece of it. So I apologize about that. In fact, it was a little more involved. I should have made the set of routes a little bit easier. In retrospect, it's one of those things you figure out once you're done. Well, let me bring up the at least get the phone lines going. You may call in, you may not. Maybe you just want to put the answer in the chat room. If you're watching live, you can go to professormesser.com/live, and there's a chat room right there. Of course, you can also find it on the website. So I'm going to bring up my Skype and connect into my call-in studio so that I can take these phone calls. If I can figure out how to do this. Is it going to talk to me?
Thank you for calling.
You're welcome. I have to be able to see the numbers, though.
Please enter your show.
I will enter my thing there. Do I have to put a pound sign? Probably do. There.
Enter your 6.
I will enter something else. And for those of you that are watching, this has got to be gripping.
You have not started a show session.
Oh, no, don't do that. No, wait. Oh, no, don't hang up on me.
You are now in the host room.
There we go. Okay. So now if you wanted to call in, you could. And of course, you don't have to. You can even go to the chat room. Hello, chat room. In my notes, by the way, let's go take these in order. So the chat room's asking, what are we drinking today? Today is a hot chocolate. It's just one of those days. So it is a hot beverage, of course, to be able to do that. In my course notes, I say wrong answers aren't counted against you. Does that mean blank ones are? No, they aren't. What I mean by that is by answering a question wrong doesn't act as a negative. Obviously, it doesn't help you. If you get it wrong, it doesn't do anything. But there are some exams you can take. I don't see many of them out there these days. Some exams, if you answer the wrong answer, it takes away points from you that you may have gained in other questions. In the case of the CompTIA exams, as we understand it, you want to be sure to fill in every possible answer. Don't leave anything blank. It doesn't help you. At least take a stab at it. Take a guess. If you're running out of time, there's 60 seconds left. You got 10 questions. Do a Christmas tree. Do something. Just answer them because you might get one right, and that might help you. It certainly won't count against you. It's kind of what I meant by that. I should probably make that clearer with those pieces. In the live labs take you through a lab. So I saw this question earlier. Is this just telling you click here, click here, click here? Yes and no. Well, of course, when you get the live labs, you get everything associated with that. You get the books, you get the sample questions. So you've already got some fundamentals. You don't just get the labs for those pieces. So that comes in handy for those that you might be doing. But the labs themselves go through a scenario. I really didn't show it very well, but I think I can pull it up on my screen again to at least show you the view of this. So I kind of skipped over it because they give you in the labs an introduction, and that's not it. There we go. There. So it's got too many buttons. So in the introduction of these, it tells you what you're going to be doing. So you're going to be spoofing a server. Which one of these is popping it out? One of these, there's the summary. Can I pop it out here? Oh, it's right. It's one of these. I think it's on the other part of my screen. Let me screen over there. Whoop, there we go. So I can pop these out. So now you can see understanding common network vulnerabilities provides you with the instruction. You can't see that at all because my head's in the way. It tells you with the instruction and server hardware to develop your hands-on skills and define topics. This module includes the exercise of spoofing a DNS server, exploring DNS server, gives you a configuration, and tells you exactly what you're going to be doing. Now, you can, of course, if you're wondering, is this really going to help me figure this out? I mean, they give you exact details of exactly what you're going to be doing, the tools you're going to be using, and here's how it's going to work. And if you think this might be something that's useful, you can always sign up for your free hour. And try this out to get those there. This is one where it might be something you need to figure it out. Maybe it's not giving you enough information for you. But again, you're getting a book. You're getting all those sample questions as well. So you can reference the book, look at the security piece, go back to your labs. You've got a lot of different resources there to be able to get the very specific details of this and being able to work with it. Yeah, I hate those exam types that give you negative points for getting one wrong. That is frustrating to have that piece there and being able to work through it. I don't like it when it does that. And that's one where the CompTIA exam, we aren't sure, of course, because the CompTIA exam does not, they don't tell you how they grade. I have to call back into my call-in studio, by the way, because it did not take it. Hung me up after I connected, but that's okay. We'll do this piece right.
Number.
Okay. I think that's much better.
You can manage your callers from the Call-In Studio web interface.
Yes. Can I? I don't think that I can. Oh, yes, I can. Okay. So now I'm called in. Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to go through that process again. There is, and that's one of the challenges. In fact, one of the biggest problems I have with CompTIA and their exam process is that they don't tell you a lot about what's going on. In fact, they kind of mess you up a bit because they very often ask questions on the exam that are not part of the exam objectives. And we aren't sure if they score them or not, but they have said in the past that they often will ask questions that are well outside the scope of the exam just to see what the answers will be. And I just think that's just not good for the person taking the exam. That messes up your mind. Like, why are they asking me about this? We often see this on the A+ exam when they're getting ready to update it. So, for example, the existing A+ exam expects you to understand Windows XP, Windows Vista, and Windows 7. But on the exam, they might ask you a Windows 8 question. Well, wait, there was no Windows 8 in the exam objectives. You're not going to study Windows 8. And they just ask it, and I think it throws off your whole piece. So think about that when you're in the exam, taking your Network Plus. You know all of these exam objectives by heart, and you've really got them down, and they ask you something you weren't expecting. Don't worry about it too much. It's probably one of those situations where they are kind of out of the blue asking you sort of this odd question. Just keep it going. If you know everything that's on the exam objectives, you're going to be just fine. That is your real key for going through those pieces and working through them. I think that's one of the best things you can do is know all of your exam objectives. What are the exam objectives, you ask? I'm glad you did, because I don't say it enough. If you go to professormesser.com/objectives, I will take you to a link to CompTIA's website where you can put in your information and learn all about the objectives. And then you can download a PDF file that tells you everything you need to know on the exam. Every single thing. Gives you an overview, certainly, but I'm going to scroll down here a little bit so we can really see this. Section 1, Network Architecture. Explain the functions and applications of various network devices. Router, switch, multi-layer switch, firewall, HIDS, IPS, IDS, access point, wireless/wired, content filter, load balancer, hub, analog modem, packet shaper, VPN concentrator. So now we know exactly the devices that we need to understand. What are these used for? How do people apply them on their network? And so there's section 1.1 tells you very specifically what you need to know. You don't have to go outside this list, because I assure you there are many other devices in an enterprise data center. You don't have to know those. You have to know these. So I get questions all the time. What do I need to know for the exam? Is there certain things I need to know over others? Right here is where you need to know them. This is the place you need to go, is the exam objectives. Unfortunately, I'll have people come to my website and they'll say, I just took my exam, got a lot of questions I wasn't expecting. And I'll ask, well, when you went through the exam objectives and you check things off, do you remember checking that off? And they said, what exam objectives are you talking about? And I'll have to point them over to these because it tells you everything. Look how detailed this is. I'm just going to keep scrolling through here. I can't say this enough, how important these exam objectives are. And of course, I use these exam objectives when I build my videos, and they're numbered the same. So the section 1.7 differentiate between network infrastructure implementations: WAN, MAN, LAN, WLAN, hotspot, PAN with Bluetooth, IR, and NFC, SCADA, media nets. All these things I have section 1.7 of my videos. So they're very easy to find as well. That comes in handy whenever you're working through those pieces. So make sure you have the exam objectives. It would be sad if you did not. I have to tell you, that would not be good. Well, I've noticed that I can't even stay connected to my call-in studio today, so maybe I won't take any calls in there. I apologize. So we'll take this little thing, but the chat room is still open. You can absolutely go to the chat room and answer some of these questions. And we have a few that have come in. By the way, a few on my Facebook page. I have a couple of those to talk about. I got an email as well this week. I wanted to talk about renewals. This came up early on In the pre-show, we were talking about renewals and continuing education units and what these things are all about. So it's important that you understand your options as well when you get your Network Plus certification. CompTIA has a page. Unfortunately, the continuing education process is involved. At least to get an understanding of it is involved. You really have to read through it with a lot of detail. But CompTIA has a page that deals specifically with renewals. How to renew your CompTIA certification. Go to the Google machine, type in CompTIA renewals. It will take you to this page. And they go through how to renew in 4 easy steps. These are not easy steps. They're difficult to understand, these 4 steps, and try to figure out unless you really go through and read them. So if you had to read one page on CompTIA site, this would be the one. And it goes through the process. The real challenge for us is not really the first step. Make sure your certification is active. That kind of makes sense because there's no reason to renew if you don't actually have a cert. And people will ask, hey, my cert is expired. What do I need to do to renew it? Like, your cert expired, brother. You're not renewing. You have to do that. And so this is why I'm mentioning, I think somebody in the chat room, guest 656 is the one who sent me the email. I think she's the person who also, she's so good at sending the CEU requests to me, and I try to get them out every week for her. She was asking, so when you renew, how does this work? So we're going to step through pieces of this. Agree to the code of ethics. All right, I got that. Good. Make your renewal payment, which you may not necessarily need to do. Here's the link for those of you wondering. There we go. Well, I guess I just duplicated it. I didn't even need to do that. We already got people doing that for us. And complete continuing education activities and submit for continuing education units. So this is the piece that's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be to renew with a higher level CompTIA certification. So if you have a Network Plus and you're having to renew it, you could take a Security Plus, and that will renew your Network Plus. So here, the big question I got in the email was, let's say you have your Network Plus and you just got it. So it's good for 3 years. And let's say the next day you go get your Security Plus. And of course, when you pass Security Plus, it's good for 3 years. So does that mean that your Network Plus is now good for 6 years or 5 years and 6 years less a day? Does it just add on? No, it does not. Would that be great? I could just start piling on the years that I would have to renew. It doesn't work that way. So when you take that higher level certification, it resets the clock and 3 years starts fresh. So it's always going to be 3 years or less. It's never going to be more than 3 years. Sorry about that. Bummer, huh? Wouldn't that have been great if you were able to do that and work through it? If you take a CompTIA exam and renew with a higher level CompTIA certification, you don't have to pay annual maintenance fees for your continuing education units. They don't require it because you're taking their exam. If you do any other process to renew your certification, you have to pay an annual maintenance fee. The fee is different depending on what certification you're renewing. So that's one of the challenges with that. So renewing with other IT certifications, you can do that. So let's click Network Plus. So if you have Network Plus, you could take an Aruba certification, Brocade, Checkpoint, Cisco. You can see all the CEUs it gives you for taking these. Look at all the Cisco certifications you could take. You can take, of course, CompTIA, CWMP, eCouncil, EMC, GIAC, HP, IBM, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a bunch of Microsoft certifications. They all give you 30 CEUs. They'll renew you, boom, just like that, just by taking one of these. Novell, get your CNE. That'll be useful. Oracle, Red Hat, SCP. Yes, that was sarcasm. Maybe it would be useful. There's certain places, though, that'd be very useful. This is one of the things I mentioned last week. You run into a Novell shop, they will love you for having your CNE. It's something great for those pieces. I think most people work through the Red Hat these days, don't they? That's one of the challenges. That is, whenever we start looking at all the renewals, you could do this. Now, when you do this, you still have to pay your annual maintenance fees. That's one easy way to renew your certification. And you can do other things too. They have a list of renewal activities, things that you could do to renew them. And there's a continuing education summary PDF they have that describes what they are. So for Network Plus, you need 30 CEUs in a 3-year period. You have to pay $49 a year for a total of $147 every 3 years. So what can you do? You can do any one of these things. And you could earn a CompTIA certification, a non-CompTIA certification. The one we're interested in, of course, is attending a webinar. That's what you're doing here. And that's when I give you that continuing education unit. So you can earn up to 6 continuing education units if you are renewing your Network Plus by simply watching this live or watching it on a replay. And in the first hour, I gave you the code to send me so I can send you back an hours-long CEU that counts towards that final number. Now, of course, you need 30. That's only going to give you 6. So you're going to have to go through this list and figure out all the other things you're going to need to do to renew. Some of them complete a training course, complete a college course. Some of you are in college. That counts towards your continuing education units. As long as the course, and they tell you, as long as the course pertains to a successful completion of a college course from a degree-granting institution that is relevant to the CompTIA exam objectives to which the certified professional is pursuing the renewal. So if renewing at the Security Plus, the course must be relevant to IT security. 50% of the course must map to one or more of the CompTIA Security Plus exam objectives. So that gives you a good example of what you should consider for doing that kind of thing. Yeah, maybe easier. Just some people love taking certification exams. Sometimes just being a member of an IT association gets you CEUs. Attending a conference. These are things you just might do normally in your job. So attending a conference is one thing. Yes, all of this is on the CompTIA website. Search for CompTIA Renewal. This is their continuing education activities chart. You can Google that, and that will take you directly to this PDF file. I should probably make a quick link for this one, shouldn't I? So that you can find it. Maybe a /activities or something. I need to do that. I should do that live. I could just walk through the command line and make the link. I have a special link server now, so I'll add it to my link server. There's something on mine that is able to do that. So I did say, if you have a Network Plus cert on your resume, but it's expired, would the potential employer be able to find out it's expired? They could. If they asked you for the link to CompTIA to validate your certification, they certainly could. Yeah, because there is a process there where you can log into your CompTIA and you can send employers your credentials. And some employers ask for that. So it's very, very possible that they might find that out. That's up to you. And what you do, that's you be you doing you, because that's not me. That would freak me out. That would bother me every day. And effectively, you are signing something that says everything on here is truthful. And if they find out it wasn't, then it's been nice working with you. Well, let me get a box for your stuff, because you're going to need that. And Bob's going to walk you out. That's useful, though. Employers want to see those things. And have those capabilities there. So do the activities work the same way as tests? If you do all the renewals within 6 months, that means you've added 6 months to your cert expiration. When you renew at the end, if you're doing continuing education units, you renew, it waits 3 years, and then your renewal starts over. You're getting those continuing education units over a 3-year period. So as you collect them at the end of the 3 years, CompTIA will look and say, so did you get all the CEUs you needed? Oh, yes, you did. You did just fine. We're renewing you for another 3 years. That's how they do them. Very simple. So these, the Network Plus Study Group webinar would indeed count towards A+ activities, because if we look at the attend a webinar rules, it says that attending a live webinar is that the activity pertains to participation in an IT webinar that is relevant to the CompTIA exam objectives in which the certified professional is renewing is pursuing a certification renewal. And in fact, it's even better than the college class. It says if renewing Security Plus, the webinar must be relevant to IT security. The webinar must map to one or more of the CompTIA Security Plus exam objectives. So for A+, there's not an A+ webinar, but there's a huge networking section on the 22801, or at least in the A+ certification, because the 900 series will be out soon. And there's a big networking section. So make sure that you're able to see those pieces as well and work through them. I think that comes in handy too. Make sure you download these charts and have them available. They will help you understand exactly, there's the chart, what you need to know. Now you can actually see what I was seeing on the screen. The webinar must map to one or more of the CompTIA Security Plus exam objectives. So I think that would. I would say yes. I think this would count towards A+ CEUs. Ultimately, you would submit them to CompTIA, and they would make that determination. And they'll tell you, you submit it to them. That's part of that annual maintenance that you're doing. You give it to them. They look through them and go, okay, that counts. You get an hour, no problem. It's very easy to do. You don't want to wait until the last minute. I will tell you that. There have been people in the chat room that have gone through and waited till the last minute, and it's never really worked out well. It's not something you want to do with those pieces. So don't do that either with those. Let's go through some other questions that came in. There was one, in fact, somebody was sending me in the chat. I wanted to see if I could find that one that was there for those pieces. I think they asked me for a BGP question. I don't seem to have it at the top here, but if you have it, send it to me in the chat, and I'll be glad to have a look at that as well. So I can see you're sending me those pieces of it. Yeah, see, you did send me a BGP question. So send it to me again. Send me in the chat. Just give me a summary of what the question is, because I don't think I have that one. The question I had was one about what's my favorite term for remembering the OSI model. And all people seem to need data processing was the one I always grew up with. So it's one kind of stuck in my head. But in my course notes, I have I think I use at least, do I use two of them? I think I used one of them on the OSI. Let me see which ones I put on there, because you can come up with some really stupid ones. Trust me, I'm really good at coming up with dumb stuff. Ask Mrs. Professor Messer. She will tell you that is the case. I think the OSI is at the very end now of this piece. Is it? I guess I could do a search. That would be useful. So I have in here, please do not trust salesperson's answers. That's not bad. All people seem to need data processing. That's my tried and true. And please do not throw sausage pizza away, which doesn't work for me because I'm not a huge fan of sausage pizza. It's okay. And I'm going to throw it away. I'm a pepperoni person. But pepperoni doesn't work. Please do not throw pepperoni pizza away. It's not even close. Doesn't work. I just failed. So that doesn't work for me. Sausage pizza, not a big fan. I know. I'm going to get emails now. You just haven't had the right sausage pizza. You haven't had the right one. Okay. I'm fine with that. We'll have to work through the details of what that means in the big world of things for those pieces. And get those running. So in the chat room now, everybody's putting their favorite little slogan, their favorite little term to figure out all those pieces. This is one where I think it comes useful because there's so much in the Network Plus certification that you have to remember. So why wouldn't you go through and figure out that? This is one where whenever I work through trying to remember is the biggest problem. One of the things that helps, and I realize if you aren't in the networking world now and you're trying to work through all these pieces, there's so much to know. But if you're working with it day to day, it just becomes so normal. Oh, yeah, 802.1x. Yeah, we're set up the AAA server, and then we're hooking it up to the wireless access points, and we're configuring them for 802.1x, and we're pointing back the TACAX. I mean, it's just a normal day. But now that's like 4 things that we talked about in the study group today, and being able to use them. And it's just sort of a normal world that you work with. Same thing for port numbers. If you don't work with port numbers every day, it just becomes memorization. It feels like it's dumb that you're having to go through and memorize port numbers. But when you work with them every day, you get used to it. You get used to 443 being SSL because you just set up a brand new Apache server and you configured both the port 80 and the port 443 references for the Apache server. And you loaded up your SSL certificates. And you get used to those things and understanding where they are and how they're used. and being able to work with them. When you purchase exam vouchers, you may see a couple of different kinds. You certainly do not want to purchase in the United States an N10005 exam voucher. That would not be a good idea because the 005 exam isn't really given anymore in the United States. Now, if you're outside the United States, that's just fine. You're exactly where you should be. In fact, that is the exam you should be taking. But there is, from CompTIA, is this the thing I want to show you? I think it is. The CompTIA website for Network Plus shows you a couple of things. They show you exam codes for the exam. So the exam codes for Network Plus are currently N10006 and JK0023. So there's actually a couple of different exam codes. They're actually exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same exam. It is the Network Plus exam. It's the N10006 version. But the one that starts with JK0 is for CompTIA Academy partners. So if you are attending a place of learning that is officially a CompTIA Academy partner, then you will buy a voucher specifically for that. And the vouchers are a different price. They're lower priced because of that. But you have to be attending the CompTIA Academy partner to be able to get that special voucher. The rest of us have to pay the standard N10006 voucher for that piece of it. Same scenario for the JK0s for the A+. It's no difference in content. It's exactly the same exam. I guess it's just a way for CompTIA to do accounting and figure out who's doing what. Maybe it's an easier way to do a SKU and get the pricing differently instead of setting, who knows, so many different ways to do pricing with these pieces. But that's what that's about. Okay, in South Africa, I have no idea what the current exam is in South Africa. You want to contact CompTIA to find out what are they using there. Is it English in South Africa? If so, it's probably the 006. But they may have localized exams in South Africa to be able. I don't think they do, though. I think it's English from CompTIA exam perspective. I may be wrong, though. So go through and figure that piece out. To be able to figure those. I think that's one where it does come in handy to know that. So make sure you get the right certification voucher. If you are unsure, you should contact CompTIA and say, I'm attending this place. Is it a CompTIA Academy partner? Usually you know very clearly because they tell you in the class, you're in a Network Plus class, here are the vouchers you're going to use. And yeah, there are some very sketchy websites out there that try to sell you the Academy partner vouchers as if it's some enormous discount off the regular voucher. But they won't accept that exam from you. If you take it and it's Academy partner, you haven't paid for the voucher. So that becomes a whole set of different challenges from CompTIA. I can't imagine that would be acceptable in their world. Yeah, because it's like 50% off. So yeah, you don't want to do that. You don't want to buy a voucher that doesn't apply to you, take the exam, and then find out, yeah, that really didn't work for you because you're not Academy partner. In fact, CompTIA may not take very kindly to that at all. I certainly wouldn't. You may not ever be able to take the Network Plus exam. Call them and check with them. That's my best advice to you. I have no insight into their process. I'm not a CompTIA Academy partner. I'm not a CompTIA partner at all. I have no plans to be a CompTIA partner. So I know what you know. So I don't have any special insight or inside track to what they're doing there. So when I have a question, I call them. I call their standard contact number and find out those pieces. Yeah, if you graduate from a CompTIA Academy partner, can you take the exams right after you graduate and use that voucher? I have no idea. That's a question for CompTIA. Now you're getting into the nuances and intricacies of their licensing and voucher system, and I don't know. I have no idea. And it's not, I would imagine they are all, and it depends, because some of these CompTIA Academy partners have testing centers on site. So it's done a little bit differently than Pearson VUE, which is where the rest of us take these exams. And I would imagine that has something to do with the voucher pricing as well. Because to do this sort of inside baseball, but to have a third party like Pearson VUE manage your tests is really expensive. So CompTIA has to pay Pearson VUE for that functionality, But if you're not paying Pearson VUE and it's already at a school and you already have desks and you already have computers and you can set up a test room and then offer your students a much discounted voucher, that's the appeal, I think. That's what's going on there. For Network Plus and the study groups, you could go through every single one of my Network Plus study groups and take every month's continuing education unit and send it to me in a day. And you would get, you can take up to 6. You can get up to 6 credits in a 3-year period for Network Plus. So you could send me 6 of those and I'll send it back in a day and you have 6 hours, just like that. Because the renewals or the continuing education piece of it during the Attend a Live webinar says pre-recorded webinars, webcasts or podcasts or YouTube videos are not valid unless certified professionals can provide proof of registration or completion certificates. And since I gave you a super secret code in my study group, by sending that to me, I know you watched the video. And that way I can send you back a certificate where I put your name, I put the month, I put everything in there, and then I digitally sign it with PGP, or technically with GPG. So I digitally sign it so you can't put somebody else's name in there because it will break the digital signature. See, I'm smart like that. So when you give it to CompTIA, if there's any questions like, no, you just did this yourself, you can provide them with the digital signature and go, nope, you can check the digital signature. Everything matches up with everything that's there. So that way you get credit where you should be getting credit, and people who aren't doing the work do not get credit. That's a really great way to take advantage of an asymmetric encryption method. So very useful to have that there. I used to use a lot of PGP. I used to work for an organization that owned PGP. So at the time, I was PGP certified in doing and implementing enormous PKI. So that was pretty fun for those and being able to work with those. Sorry. So if you want to be able to get the code to get continuing education units, you have to watch the video. I'm not going to repeat it, and folks in the chat room should not either. That's the point. You should be listening to the video and watching, and that's how I know you did. So that's the key. And it's during that first hour. It's not in any of my study groups. I always do it in the first hour. There's maybe one instance of an A+ study group where it was 3 minutes after or something like that. But I try to get them in somewhere in the first hour so that you know exactly where to look. Because I'm giving you a 1 hour credit. Sometimes I just talk and talk and talk. We've gone almost 3 hours on some of these, which I understand is ponderous for not just you, but certainly me too. I try not to do that. But it's always in the first hour where I'm going to give you the code so you don't miss that. I think that's important as well. Let me do a couple of things here. Turn this off here and look at other things in the chat room. Did you send me that BGP question? I did not see it. Well, actually, maybe I didn't because it's hidden behind a window. Let me refresh my screen and I will have a look at it. Now that I've been going. Okay. Oh, yes. Now I remember the question. Thank you for reminding me. This is an irritating thing as well, by the way, this question you sent. How timely, because somebody just sent me some, you folks send me some interesting emails at times. Some of them are very emotional. You get kind of angry at me at times. And this question, usually it's not BGP people are asking about as it relates to this. Usually they're sending it to me with EIGRP is the problem. But it is around how we qualify what this dynamic protocol is. Is it, and I've got, let me bring up the exact piece of information because I even went to my videos to make sure I wasn't telling you the wrong thing. That's always my fear, of course, is I do a video and in the video, I give you something that is patently wrong. That is just completely incorrect. It happens though, because I'm creating these slides. You go through all these slides, you start working through them. And when I'm shooting the video, I'm not always thinking about what I'm saying. I try to be in the moment, but sometimes you're more interested in getting that content out of your mouth, and you end up saying something that's completely wrong, and in many cases is different than what's on the slide. Sometimes my slide is wrong, and I simply repeat what's on the slide without thinking about it, knowing that it's completely wrong. So the real question of this one around BGP was, is it a link state distance vector? Is it a hybrid routing protocol? So that's really a question, is which one of these is it? Now, in my videos, I break down what all of these things are. So for instance, I qualify BGP. I'll even bring this up so you can see it. I qualify BGP as a distance vector protocol because at its fundamental level, it is. It is deciding how to get to another location based on the distance. And the distance in the case of BGP, very similar to RIP and RIP v2. That's the way it works, which is different than, I think I have one just before this, that's the link state routing protocol, where it determines how to get to a route based on, is the link even there? It's kind of that scenario. How do I get there? And how fast can I get there? That's a link state routing protocol. And so in the world of Network Plus, those are two of the terms we use. The other term is a hybrid routing protocol, which is kind of a combination of the two. And it's kind of a difficult category in itself. And in fact, this is where the Cisco folks say, no. Cisco says that EIGRP is a distance vector routing protocol. I don't agree with that. I think there's way too much involved with EIGRP to simply qualify it as distance vector. I think there's an argument you can make that that's really a hybrid, this little combination of both. Although I get where the Cisco folks are coming from, that at a purist perspective and looking at the intricacies of the protocol and how it operates, you could really only call it distance vector. I get it. But it's not. It's hybrid. You should really, it is. There's so much involved here. And quite honestly, Cisco keeps changing the definition. And I think that's where the arguments are coming from, as they keep going back and forth. So I qualify BGP as the distance vector. I think that's the best qualification. Part of the problem you have, though, is protocols like BGP and OSPF, not really RIP, but I guess EIGRP to some degree. All of these protocols are extremely complex. It really is very difficult to put any of them into a very specific, narrow category, because you're always going to have these differences, these parts of that depart from the rule, and that's when I really run into problems with this. Is that when I work through these things, I'm creating a video that's giving you a very broad perspective and how we most understand this protocol to work. But if you start digging into BGP or OSPF or EIGRP, we could sit at a table and talk for days about the nuances of those protocols, how they're working under the surface, and what categories they would really fit into. The same way that I get some very interesting emails about the OSI model and how it really is set up this way, but it's a model. So there's the way that we approach BGP is really from a distance vector perspective. I recognize there's other nuances to the protocol and other ways that it could be configured, and you could really put it into a different category of link state. Maybe it's a hybrid instead. I get that, but it's not. It's distance vector. Just go with distance vector and you're fine. In fact, from a CompTIA perspective, they look at it very broadly as well. Distance vector. Once you get into BGP, you'll see it has some great stuff in there. There's fantastic things in there. And it's not so much about isn't distance vector, isn't link state, because you're really implementing it is your challenge. Not understanding the architecture behind it. You're not worrying so much at that point about the nuances of link state and distance vector. When you're implementing BGP, you're now dealing with a whole different set of requirements. And it's not that big. Yes, OSI versus TCP model. There you go. Someone sent me a very pointed email once that really complained that I was using the OSI model and that it's outdated and nobody ever uses it and everybody uses the TCP model. And why are you doing that? And I said, what are you talking about? That's all we talk about, is the OSI model. It's everywhere. And you got to realize at the time I was working for a next generation firewall company, one of the biggest, most popular companies in the Valley. As a systems engineer, I was implementing these in some of the biggest data centers in the world. That's all we talked was OSI model. And I had to figure out, what do you mean the OSI model's outdated? I had to dig into it. Like, I am definitely not following you. And the person said, no, it said in my book, OSI is outdated. I said, oh, the OSI protocol is outdated, because there was at one time an OSI protocol, and the model was kind of based on the protocol. But the protocol never really took off, but the OSI model stuck around. So I was able to make that difference to say, no, you meant, the protocol is outdated, not the model is outdated. So you get in those conversations too. And I guess for BGP, it's a similar thing. You can argue that it perhaps is on that piece and being able to work with it. But I think ultimately you're going to need to pass the exam, and it's a distance vector protocol. So that was a long explanation about those and being able to work with them. And I think, in fact, you even said, in your things you were reading, it's qualified as hybrid. Like that's a bit of a reach for hybrid, but I see where they're coming from. And I guess you could make that argument. But I think from a fundamental perspective, go with distant vector and you'll be great. I think that's really the best way to go about doing it. What does Wikipedia even say? What does, what's another resource? What is that? There's a BGP book I just was looking at. I should go back and look at that one either. Pull in resources from multiple places. Don't just take my word on what it is. I could be absolutely wrong. Sometimes I am. Well, I've tried to clean those up, because people will send me notes and go, you got that one way wrong. I go, oh, you're absolutely right. I'll edit the video. I repost it. So you never see when I'm wrong, because I fix it. Books can't do that. So I love that I have videos. I just fix it, stick it online. But I, of course, tell them, oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. I messed that one up, because I'm just human too. I need to figure those pieces out, because I'm trying to make the most accurate materials I possibly can. So I will go back and fix those pieces. In fact, the Intent 006, I'm very happy with that content because there's very little that we had to go back and work out in post-production or go back and reissue a new version. It was just spot on content. I was very pleased with it. And how it turned out. So I hope that gives you some insight into why I call it distance vector and whether it's good or not. How likely are us mere mortals to come across actually working with BGP? Pretty likely. It is if you're doing anything with routing over the internet, if you're connecting your company's network to the internet, and you want to be able to do dynamic routing, especially if you have multiple sites, and you want to be able to work with those, or especially if you have multiple connections to the internet that are going to different internet providers. You may want to do that for redundancy, so that if one internet provider goes down, you still have a link to the internet. You need BGP knowledge to be able to set up that routing configuration and make sure that your traffic is going to go to the right place and come back from the right place, and that it's going to be able to be understood when it comes back from those places. So you absolutely will start working with BGP in that scenario. Practically anybody is connected to the internet these days, and more than you might think have redundant connections to the internet, and BGP becomes very important. OSPF, it could be either way. You could go back and forth on that one. A lot of places do a lot of OSPF. Some places do no OSPF. A lot of the routing that's done, interestingly enough, in most places is static, because most networks aren't so difficult and complex that you would need a dynamic routing protocol. Because usually you have a remote site. The remote site communicates back to your corporate office. It's one link. If you're at the remote site, if you want to go anywhere, go here. That's your route. You don't need dynamic. There's no fancy things to go. If you need to go to corporate, go there. Go out that interface. Done. And there's only one router, so go. Then you've set up your static route. It never has to get changed again. Now, if all of your sites are meshed and you've got redundant links between those, and you want it to automatically fail over, you want it to converge if there's ever a problem. Maybe there's somebody runs over a fiber line. Happens all the time. Somebody breaks a fiber line in construction somewhere and brings down part of your network because that's where AT&T's network runs through. You need to be able to route around it, and that's what those dynamic routing protocols can do. Although you can certainly do a lot of that with static routing. You set up your static routes with some different metrics. The first route eventually won't get there. You can have it fail over. Some nice things you can do there, but a lot of people use dynamic routing for those pieces. I think that covers the big questions that came in this week. And I think that was a pretty good run through for the study group. There were a number of things that came through that dealt with IP addressing. We talk about this in the chat room a lot, which is subnetting. What state the subnetting we should know for the exam? Do we need to understand the classes, how those fit into the big world of things, what classless-based subnetting is about, and then how to actually do it? I had a big conversation the other night about the broadcast address and the network address and why they're in the subnet and why I have to take those two addresses out and why the rest are host addresses. So one thing I always say about the Network Plus exam, and you'll notice I don't do a lot of subnet questions on my study groups. And that's because when you look at the exam objectives, there's quite honestly not a lot of subnetting on it. If you were to look at it and go through section 1.8, talks about IP version 4. It talks about the address structure, subnetting, API-PA, classful, A, B, C, and D, and classless. And that's it. That is part of a section 1.8 in this first section that contains 12 different sections. That's part of a larger exam that has, let me scroll up so we can all see it, that has 4 other sections. So it's part of section 1. And that it's part of a section of section 1 that is only 22% of the exam. And then you've got the rest of the exam that has things that have nothing to do with subnetting. So what I'm trying to say is it's not that subnetting isn't important. You might get one question about it on your exam. You might get 2 questions. You might get 0 questions. And people spend an incredible amount of time going through the subnetting piece. And I have videos for this, and you can step through them and understand them and go through that process as well. And I think it's important to know subnetting. It's incredibly important to know subnetting. But for this exam, it is not incredibly important to know subnetting. It's just important. It's just one of the exam objectives that you need to know. If it gets under your skin, if it bothers you, if you just can't get it, you may be better off taking that time and understanding other sections of the exam. Because if you understood everything associated with the Network Plus exam, everything that's in this list, and you knew all of it, but you just didn't know subnetting, you're still going to pass your exam because it's only going to be one question. There's so many other things you need to know on the Network Plus and being able to work with them. So concentrate on what you can do. And don't worry so much. Now, as soon as you move from Network Plus and you go to, for instance, Cisco exams, you got to know subnetting cold. You got to be able to subnet and understand a network configuration in seconds. If you take, even for your CCENT, which is really, it's not the entry level for Cisco, but it effectively is for the network management piece. It's half of the CCNA. And that exam, you need to know subnetting cold, or at least you need to have your chart all laid out so that you can figure out a subnet in 15 seconds. And hopefully you can actually do it faster than that. And I keep saying I'm going to make a video on how I do that, because I have a chart that I use when I sit for an exam. A lot of the subnets I just remember out of my mind because I've used them over the years in environments. And when you start to use a particular subnet over and over, it sticks in your mind where the different delineations are. But the 006 is, and the 006 videos are identical to the ones at 005 that talk you through the subnetting process. And I think they do a pretty good job. They teach you the subnetting at a binary level so you can understand what it's doing. There are some shortcuts that I don't go into just because the Network Plus exam doesn't go into that level of detail. So I think it would be good to have a set of videos that took you through the entire process, because I think I can take you through in 4 or 5 steps. Learn this, then learn this, then learn this, and learn this. Now you got it. And you should be able to do it in 15 seconds with the chart. And that's what I do in my exams. I write down everything on my chart because I can't trust myself in an exam. I cannot go to an exam and know that I'm going to be able to think properly. There's too much adrenaline. There's too many things going on around me. There's other people in the room. They don't smell good. He's got a cold. Is he wearing shoes? Is he not wearing shoes? So my mind is somewhere else. I don't know what's going on around me. So I need something to help me focus and make sure that when I'm making these decisions, because you only have so much time on these exams, I'm going, oh yeah, on that subnet, it's this range. I need something to double check me. And that's what I use my chart for, because I know people who are in networking roles, people who are the smartest people I've met in networking, still have to think about the subnet piece. You still have to go back and think through when you're working with subnets. I'm putting in a new piece of equipment. Here's its IP address. Here's the subnet mask. Here's the default gateway. You should be able to look at that and go, wait a second, is that default gateway in that subnet? Because I've had people hand me IP address assignments and say, go install this piece of equipment. And I would look at this and go, well, you've given me an IP address and you've given me a subnet mask and you've given me a gateway, and the IP address and the default gateway are in completely different subnets. And they look at it and go, oh, yeah, sorry, it's a /26, isn't it? Yeah, that needs to be this gateway. Okay, got it. Without you being able to do that quickly, you would go off and try to configure it, and you probably during the configuration, it will tell you, you can't do that. That's not going to work, because they double check when you're typing these things in. The machine says, I can't do that. That doesn't even make logical sense. Then you have to go back and do this. Don't talk about people not wearing shoes. This is Bill Burr's podcast. He talks about being on a plane, and I've traveled a lot on planes. I had a job where I did international travel. I've got lots of miles on lots of airlines, and people who don't wear shoes on the plane, he talks about that. And it's just a thing. And I think of that every time I go to take a test, to get on a plane, to those types of things. Oh, good for those people, those free spirits that live amongst us. They're delightful, aren't they? So don't worry so much about the subnetting piece of it and where it comes from. That's the real challenge. You don't know. I might have shoes on right now. I might not. You don't know. Can you even see if I bring up can you even see them? Nope. It's a mystery. I'm hiding them now. I am wearing shoes, just so you know. But it's in a testing environment. Not so much. Don't do that. Don't go like that. And on the airplane, people, what are you thinking? Don't go like that. So that's my little rant for today. That was the thing we need to think about maybe not doing. But that's also my philosophy around IP subnetting as it relates to the Network Plus exam. I think some people in the past have interpreted my opinion of that as being that IP addressing and subnetting is not important. It is not as incredibly important. It is something you'll do every day in your networking job. If you get into security, you do it all the time. If you don't get into security, you're working with server administration, databases, data centers, virtualization especially, and now the newer types of networking, the virtual networks and everything else that we're building out, you have to know subnetting cold. So just another one of those things to think about when you're stepping through, why am I learning this? Trust me, there's a reason that you're going through this level of pain to learn subnetting, because it's important. In some ways, IPv6 is so much better because you're effectively going to be given a network address that you're not going to have to subnet, because if you want another one subnet, you just get another subnet. They just hand them out, and you just have a bunch of subnets that's /64s. Oh, you need another one? Here's another /64. Oh, you need another one? We can keep doing this forever because there are so many that we can have. We'll just keep handing them out like candy. That's kind of a weird thing to think about, but that's where we are now with IPv6, if we would just start using it. So that's kind of where I'm coming from that perspective anyway. Well, that brings us to the end of at least another hour of this. I want to thank you, chat room, for your questions. Thanks for sending me the questions before. Thanks for reminding me, chat room, about the one with the renewals and the BGP. I should really write these things down, but then you've got my back. So I appreciate that. Thanks for attending, because I wouldn't be able to do this entire study group without your help. I want to remind everyone that the next study group is going to be December the 9th. So I've got it earlier in the month, you'll notice, because we've got the holidays later in the month. IPv6 does have subnets. It's just now we don't have to subnet the subnets. It's kind of nice to be able to do that. But there is, if you get into an ISP's world, they do a lot of subnetting with IPv6. You just probably would not unless you were doing that piece. Don't forget about the earlier study groups, though, and check out the calendar on the website. If you forget or you want to know when the next one might be, I need to post the ones for January just so we know which ones are coming. I think I may have done that already. So let's see. This is November. Nope. December's are there, and I'll have to put January's out shortly. Don't forget about all the links. If you want to find me on anything, professormesser.com/Twitter/YouTube/Instagram/LinkedIn/Google+. I'm all over the place. You'll be able to find me. And of course, you've got the Contact Us link at the top of the website. And that way you'd be able to find me there as well. I like reading the messages you send me, and I'm more than happy to respond back. I appreciate you doing that as well. We'll see you next week is the Security Plus study group. That'd be a great time to do some more Security Plus. Until then, thanks for joining me, everyone. We'll see you next time on the study group.